The wind speaks differently in Black River Falls. It does not whistle, it does not hum. It sighs long and low, as though pushing back centuries of sorrow with every cold breath. There is a weight in the air there, heavy and saltless, like the air before snow. And yet it is not the snow that people remember, it is the silence. A silence so deep it seemed to pool in doorways, to gather in window panes, to thicken in the throat. A silence that began in the winter of 1892 and never truly left. The town sits curled in the elbow of the Black River in central Wisconsin. A quiet, forest-fringed place built by lumbermen and settlers who believed they could tame the wild by naming it. For a time, they did. There were mills and post offices, and a schoolhouse with a bell that rang too loudly in the mornings. Children played in the frostbitten yards. Dogs barked from porches. Fires smoked from chimneys. And then something shifted, slowly, and then, all at once, it began with the girl, no older than 10 found, swinging from a beam in her father's barn. Her small body laced with the hem of a kitchen apron. They say her shoes were neatly placed beneath her, her hair still wet from washing. Her mother had gone to fetch water. Her father was in town, arguing over timber rights. The girl had been alone only 15 minutes, but before that, long before that, there had been other signs. A boy who'd nailed shut his own bedroom door from the inside. A woman who set her baby in a washtub and walked into the river. A pastor who refused to come down from the bell tower for 5 days, convinced the sky was about to open and swallow the town whole. He survived. His wife did not. They called it illness at first. Something in the water, perhaps, or a sickness. Of the nerves melancholia, they whispered, hysteria, but it moved too strangely for science, too slowly for plague. It seemed to settle over the town like soot. You would not notice it until your neighbor stared too long at nothing, or your cousin stopped speaking entirely. Then, one by one, houses emptied, families packed wagons and vanished overnight. Others stayed, but were never quite the same. The school closed for a season after the teacher left mid. She walked out the front door and never returned. Her chalk still rests on the sill, snapped in half, and then the ground began to change. The graveyard, small and square, lies just outside the southern edge of town, tucked between frostbitten birch trees and a narrow slope of stone. It was never large, never ornate, but by that third winter, the graves began to rise, narrower, deeper, less like rectangles and more like shafts. Children, they say, almost all children. Some swore the soil rejected them if laid flat. Others claimed the new pastor, a severe man from Illinois, insisted on the upright burial to prepare them for judgment. But the pastor died in his sleep before he could be asked, and the sexton, the man tasked with digging the graves, began to mutter nonsense into the frost as he worked. He was found one morning with soil packed into his ears and mouth, as if he'd tried to swallow the land itself. They buried him standing too. Old records show that between 1892 and 1894, the population of Black River Falls shrank by nearly half. Not from relocation, not from war, from something else. Something no one agreed on, but all could feel. There were too many unexplainable deaths, too many hollow-eyed wanderers. A farm burned every other week. Children stopped attending school. The town's doctor took his own life after scribbling across his own ledger in Latin. There is no cure for hunger born of the soul. No birds nested that spring. Years passed. The world moved on. The rest of the state remembered Black River. Falls, if at all, as a once hopeful logging town that simply fell into economic despair. Historians wrote essays about boom and bust cycles, about frontier hardship and mental illness. But the locals never blamed economics. They blamed the ground. Even now, if you walk past the old cemetery on a winter night, you may feel it the way the wind avoids the corner where the children were buried. The snow does not settle there as it should. The trees do not grow toward the sun, but away from it, crooked and pale. Some of the stones remain too narrow for names, only numbers chiseled at odd angles. Others have sunk entirely, as if pulled downward by something that still hungers. Local folklore tells of a figure neither man nor spirit that once wandered the woods just past the edge of town, covered in burlap, hands black with soot. It would watch children from the tree line, never approaching, never blinking. Some claimed it was a symbol of collective grief. Others said it was the thing that fed Dot. No one saw it after the burials stopped, but the air has never cleared. People who visit speak of headaches, of nausea, of the urge to whisper when no one else is there. Photographs taken in the graveyard often come out distorted, blurred edges, strange shadows. One family who moved into a nearby farmhouse left within 3 days. The father, an amateur stonemason, claimed the foundation, wept salt water in the night. They never even unpacked their dishes. No definitive answer ever came. No state inquiry. No centralized theory. Black River Falls survived, in a way. It still appears on maps. A quiet, functional town with gas stations and motels and late autumn snow. But something in it remains sunken, wary, like a face that forgets how to smile. The upright graves remain untouched, and so we are left with a question that echoes through soil and smoke. What happens to a place when grief becomes ritual? When sorrow is not buried but planted buckrite, awake, facing the frost? The wind in Black River Falls does not whistle. It remembers, and some memories were never meant to rest. There is a place in northern Georgia where the water does not sleep by day. Lake Lanier stretches wide and blue, the sun glinting off its endless reach. Laughter skips from boat decks, jet skis carve bright lines across the surface, and families picnic on its shores, unaware or perhaps unwilling to know what lies beneath. But by night, the lake changes. The light dies differently there, slower, stranger, as if caught on something invisible and ancient, something waiting just below the surface. In that darkness, the water forgets how to be still. And sometimes it sings. They say a town sleeps. Beneath Lake Lanier, not a scattering of ruins or a few crumbling walls, but a full town with homes and roads, wells and churchyards. The name of that town was Oscarville, and what happened to it was not an accident of time. It was buried, not by earthquake or flood, but by decree in the early 1950s. The US Army Corps of Engineers began construction on a massive reservoir, part of a growing web of hydroelectric projects. The river was to be tamed, the valleys filled, the old ways surrendered in the name of progress. Farmland, homesteads, entire hamlets all were bought out and cleared, or so the papers claimed. But not all towns were treated the same. Oscarville was a thriving black community, a place of fertile fields, bricks, schools, and wooden churches that held hymns in their beams. It stood on red soil and carried stories in its breath. And yet, when the lake came, Oscarville disappeared. The residents were displaced. Some say without proper compensation. Others whisper they were pushed faster than the law allowed. The Land was carved, the trees felled, and then the valley filled. But the buildings, many of them, remained. They did not raise the steeple. They did not exhume every grave. The bones of Oscarville were left intact beneath the rising tide, beneath the lie of leisure. The water climbed slowly, covering the windows, the doorways, the pulpit. And when it reached the church bell, it did not ring. Not then, it rings now. Divers speak of strange echoes down there, bells without ropes, a feeling of breath on the back of the neck in a world where no breath should exist. Lights flicker beneath the surface, moving slowly, steadily, like lanterns held in forgotten hands. One man claimed he saw pews still standing in perfect rows. Another found a staircase that led to a door, still closed, still waiting, and there are the bodies Lanier takes more than its share. Drownings, crashes, unexplained disappearances. Boaters fall in and are never found. Some are pulled from the water months later, untouched by decay, their skin pale and perfect as wax. Others are never seen again. Locals have stopped calling it coincidence. There are whispers that something claims those who disturb its sleep. One woman, an old caretaker at a lakeside chapel, swears she saw headlights skimming the surface one fog-drenched morning. They moved slowly, as if following the curve of a street no longer there. But there was no sound, no engine, just that low electric hum, like a wire straining under a weight too ancient to name. The lights passed her dock, then vanished swallowed by the mist. Another man, a fisherman with trembling hands, refused to go back after his final trip. He said the water beneath his boat went still, unnaturally still, just before dawn. He leaned over and saw something watching him. From the deep, not a fish, not a person, just a shape, unmoving, face turned upward. He did not throw his net. He left everything behind, his tackle, his oars, even his boots. I was not meant to see that, he muttered. It was not meant to see me. But perhaps the strangest tale belongs to the bell. It is said the church in Oscarville still stands in fragments under the lake, its walls softened by silt, its rafters broken like ribs. And yet, the steeple endures, not whole but present, and in moments of deep silence when the air hangs heavy, and no engine hums, and the fog curls like fingers across the water, a sound drifts upward. A single, mournful bell, not a sharp toll, not a chime, just a long, low groan of metal, like memory straining to return. Those who hear it say it stays in the bones for hours, that their dreams afterward are always the same. A congregation beneath the water, seated in silence, eyes open, faces lifted, toward a pulpit that stands empty. The preacher, they say, is always missing, but something else stands in his place. Lanier is not just haunted by what was lost, it is shaped by what was left behind. Unmarked graves, buried photographs, timber beams that once heard laughter, now warped by depth and silence. The earth holds memory, and water remembers what it covers, especially when it was never asked to hold it. The truth of Oscarville is not found in textbooks. It is not printed on the tourist brochures. It is not engraved on the little historical placards that dot the lakeside parks. But it is felt in the way the fog clings too long to the hills, in the way the birds go quiet before sundown, in the way the water never seems warm, no matter how bright the sun. It is felt in the hush that comes when someone asks what used to be here, and no one answers. There are lakes that quench thirst, that nourish, that mirror the sky in perfect stillness. Lake Lanier does not mirror, It swallows. What they submerged refused to drown. And so it waits. The surface of the lake gleams like glass. But glass can fracture. And beneath that shimmer lies a town that was never meant to be forgotten. A bell that was never meant to go silent. And voices, so many voices that still hum beneath the current, waiting to be heard. The lake does not forgive. And in the hours just before dawn, when the world holds its breath and the moon drags silver, light across the water, it may ring again. That single, hollow note, carried across a surface too smooth, too still, too heavy with memory. Listen closely. Not all prayers reach heaven. Some fall downward into water, into silence, into the bell that drowns and still dares to sing. Time breaks differently in Vilska. It doesn't crack like glass. It softens, folds in on itself like wet paper. There, on certain nights, a minute stretches longer than it should. Shadows fall strangely, and the old tower clock, once proud, once punctual, no longer dares to chime midnight. It remembers too much. June 10th, 1912. A windless night in southern Iowa. The kind of night where shutters barely tremble and silence collects in corners like dust. The kind of night that passes without notice. No thunder, no scream, no hint of what the dawn would bring. In the little white house at the edge of town, 508 East 2nd Street, 8 people slept behind locked doors. Josiah Moore, his wife Sarah, their 4 young children, and 2 visiting sisters from the neighborhood. They had spent the evening in church, walked home beneath a sleepy moon, and extinguished their lamps by 10 dot. By morning, they were all dead. No one heard a sound. No dog barked. No window shattered. Nothing stirred. And yet, when a neighbor grew concerned at the family's stillness, and a key was fetched, and the door creaked open into the gloom, a horror older than reason awaited. All 8 struck down in their beds with the blunt side of an axe, their faces covered gently, as if to shield them from seeing their own end. Mirrors draped in cloth, the murder weapon leaning against the wall, slick with something more than blood, and beside it, placed with terrible precision, a slab of raw bacon wrapped in a dish towel. Nothing had been stolen, only the silence. The attic door was open, and in the dust above there were marks, knees, feet, as though someone had waited there, crouched in the dark, listening to the breath of a house falling asleep. Authorities said the killer was already inside when the family returned, that he waited until dreams had softened them, that he crept down when the final lamp was extinguished. 7 minutes. That's how long the tower clock paused. Witnesses would later swear that between 12:08 and 12:15, the hands refused to move, not slowed, not broken, just waiting. The suspects came like thunderclouds. A wandering preacher muttering scripture to shadows, a drifter seen polishing an axe near the train yard, a rival businessman with old, quiet hatred in his eyes. And then there was the neighbor, too close, too watchful, too eager to tell his version of events, but each theory frayed at the edge, each confession unraveled in the cold morning light. No trial ever closed the wound. The house stood empty, for a time, but the town could not look away. They spoke of it in hushed tones. Children dared each other to touch the doorknob. Mothers turned their faces when walking past. And the clock, that solemn guardian of time, developed a habit of forgetting itself. Not every night, not every year, but always in June, always in silence. Some claimed the killer was not human at all, but something summoned, a wrath given shape. born from envy or shame. Others believed it was a spirit, drawn to the quietest corners, to the moments when all doors are locked and breath grows rhythmic and slow. The truth never came, only echoes, and the house began to breathe. Visitors spoke of footsteps on stairs that creaked too soon, of children's laughter in empty rooms, of the attic door swinging gently back and forth with no breeze to guide it. One woman fainted after glimpsing a figure in the mirror, not her own reflection, but a face beneath a white sheet, eyes open and shining. A man fled screaming when the walls whispered his name. They say the pantry still holds the smell of raw meat, and then there's the clock. Even now, its hands pause some nights, just for 7 minutes. Never more, never less. Always between 12 and 1. As though something is retracing old steps. As though time itself must honor the moment when everything stopped. The most chilling detail, perhaps, is this. The faces were all covered. Not in haste, but in reverence. Pillowcases, clothing, a soft cloth for each victim, draped carefully, tenderly, as though the killer could not bear their eyes. Who does that? What sort of mind brings death, then cloaks it in kindness? Or was it guilt? Some believe the killer remained afterward, that he sat in their parlor in the stillness, waiting for the sun, that he tasted the family's food, gazed out their windows, that he did not flee, but watched the world wake around a house of sleep, that he was never seen leaving because he never truly did, that the house kept him. Even now, the rooms feel crowded, as if someone is always just behind you. The air hums with something ancient, something unfinished. Footsteps echo where no foot falls, and in the attic, dust never settles. It stirs without reason, rising in slow, lazy spirals, like breath drawn through invisible lungs. People still come to Villisca, to touch the doorframe, to stare at the windows, to listen for the sound of something stirring. But the house never speaks, not in words. Only in temperature drops and door hinges, in the uneasy feeling that you are not alone in that little white house. Time was broken, and when time breaks, it does not heal. It remembers, it pauses. 7 minutes is not long. The time it takes to boil water, to tie a child's shoes, to finish a prayer. But in those 7 minutes, something came unmoored in Villisca. Something slipped sideways, a breath, a shadow, a heartbeat, and never found its way back. The town carries on, clocks tick, bells chime, streets hum with life. But beneath it all, the silence lingers. A thin, invisible thread, stretched from attic to bell tower, from pillowcase to blade. And every June, that thread trembles. It is not a scream, it is not a cry. It is the hush before. It is the sound of something waiting to be remembered. There is a place where the forest holds its breath, deep within the pine barrens of New Jersey, past where the gravel crumbles and the signage ends. There is a bend in the trees that does not belong to the rest of the world. There, the pine needles lie thicker, the moss never dries, and even the birds, so brazen elsewhere, fall silent. The locals call it Devil's Creek, though no map bears that name. No route leads to it directly. You have to wander wrong, step off the path, feel the pull of something unseen that wants you just near enough to listen, but not to leave. In the summer of 1962, a child's body was found in that bend of earth. He was not torn, not bruised, not marked in any way. His skin was pale but not drained, his eyes shut but not clenched, his fingers curled as though still gripping a thread of something softer than air. His clothes were clean, almost formula. Cotton shirt, short sleeves, buttoned up, socks white as bone. Not a single leaf disturbed. He had simply been placed there, cradled in the bank's gentle slope like an offering. There was no wallet, no name, no cry reported in the night. Number. Missing child matched the shape of his face, the slope of his brow, the faint birthmark behind his ear. Authorities scoured records from 3 states. Nothing. The autopsy brought no peace. His heart was full of water, heavy swollen, blue, but his lungs were dry. No trauma, no cause, just stillness, the coroner wrote. They buried him just outside the tree line, where the grass does not quite grow and the stones sink a little faster. His headstone carries no name, just the date carved simply, and beneath it a single feather. Etched with such care, it looks almost soft, as though the boy had left part of a wing behind. That should have been the end, but the forest does not like to be disturbed. In the months that followed, strange things began to cling to the edges of the barrens. First, a hiker young, newlywed vanished near the same bend. He had gone ahead to check the path. His wife called after him. There was no answer. Just the rustling of the leaves, then nothing. Search dogs led rescuers in circles, always returning to the same cedar stump, just a few yards from the creek. The scent ended there. Then a trapper, known to locals for his weather-worn boots and half-finished stories, disappeared without even leaving his tools. His snare lines were still strewn, his pipe still warm. A rabbit, half-skinned, lay where he'd knelt, but no boot prints led away. The third was a girl. 14, she had argued with her mother and gone storming into the woods. A teenage defiance, the kind that should end in muddy shoes and apologies. But she never came back. Her footprints, delicate and deep, vanished at the edge of Devil's Creek. Where they ended, a trail of pine cones began arranged in a line, perfectly straight, all pointing north. Campers began to report strange sounds after dusk, not animals, not branches, but weeping, soft, childlike, wandering through the trees. Some heard it right behind them, turning fast to nothing but needles and bark. Others said it circled their tents in the hours before dawn. When they stepped out, the fire was cold and their compasses spun slowly, even when held still. One group swore they saw a boy waist deep in the water, not swimming, not moving, just standing, head bowed, arms at his sides. When they called out, he lifted his head but made no sound. His mouth opened, no breath came, and then he sank not like a drowning child, but like a stone dropped into a well. Only one dared go to the grave, a man with a faded jacket and a notebook of names. He said he remembered a brother who vanished when he was 6. He remembered the white socks, the feather drawing, but not the face, never the face. It had gone from his memory like fog burned off by morning. He left a toy car at the grave, a red one, rusted now, but once bright. He whispered something before he walked away. No one heard what he said, but the grave so many years old was wet the next morning, as though something had wept through the soil. There are no clear paths to Devil's Creek, not anymore. Roads near it blur on printed maps. GPS signals stutter and die. Locals won't walk past the tree with the notch shaped like an open eye. They say that's where it starts to follow. You'll think it's just the wind, but the wind doesn't watch. The wind doesn't wait. Some say there is something in the barrens that calls to the lonely, something ancient and root-bound, not evil in the loud, snarling way, but in the quiet, patient way that simply takes. It does not chase, it does not hunt, it waits, and it remembers, and always the water remains still, too still. Even in rain, the surface of Devil's Creek does not ripple as it should. Droplets vanish without sound. Frogs refuse to rest there. Deer will not drink. And in the summer, when heat makes the leaves crackle and children wander too far, the sound returns, that soft weeping, trailing through the pines like smoke from a candle long extinguished. And if you hear it, if it finds you, you must not speak, because sometimes it isn't weeping, sometimes it's asking, has anyone seen my brother? And if you answer, it will follow you home. The grave still stands. The feather still catches moonlight in a way stone shouldn't, and the trees bow slightly at that bend in the creek, as though listening for a name they've never heard spoken. The pine barrens are vast, 1,000 acres of silence and shadow, but there, in that one forgotten curve where the birds fall quiet, something waits with dry lungs and a heart full of water, and the forest breathes in, but never exhales. There is a window in the woods that still burns with the memory of eyes, not flames, not smoke, but something older. A glow without warmth, without source. The kind of light that flickers in the minds of those who have seen too much or returned from places that should have stayed sealed. The window floats between trees in Dudleytown, Connecticut, where the forest grows too fast, too thick, too quiet. Its frame is blackened, its glass long gone, but still it watches, not like a ruin, but like an open mouth paused before a scream. And if you stand too long before it, something stands with you from the other side. They say the town was cursed from the moment it was named. Dudleytown was founded in the mid-1700s, nestled at the foot of the Dark Entry Forest, a name that felt too apt even in its own time. The Dudleys had come from England, dragging behind them a long whispering shadow accusations of treason, of madness, of whispers traded for coin in the fog-drenched corners of courts. One ancestor was beheaded for conspiring against the crown. Another vanished into the Welsh hills after claiming to see angels dragging chains behind them. And when the last of them crossed the sea, they brought with them not wealth, but silence. The town was never large. A few homes, a mill, a church. That tilted slightly west as if trying to lean away. But nothing in Dudleytown stayed whole. Crops yellowed. Sheep wandered into the woods and returned with eyes like wet stones. Children whispered names they'd never been taught. The trees crept closer each season, as though trying to smother what should not have been born. Deaths came strangely. Woman struck by lightning under clear skies. A farmer who walked into the woods humming and never returned. A boy who drowned in a dry well. Madness became common. Men sat motionless for days, their mouths open as if waiting for something to be poured inside. One neighbor claimed to see shadows move in the fields when the moon was high tall and thin, with limbs too long, pacing in patterns only the insane could follow. By the early 1900s, Dudleytown was abandoned, not in haste, not in fire, but in resignation, a quiet erasure. Families left without selling. Letters stopped being delivered. Roads cracked and folded inward like old paper. Only the stone foundations remained soft rectangles of ruin buried. Beneath ivy and moss, their walls crumbling like memory in the rain. Except for the window, no one remembers which house it belonged to. No photos survive. And yet, there it hangs upright, unbroken, suspended between two dying birch trees. A single wooden frame with no glass, yet on some nights it catches light. Hikers speak of it in uneasy tones. One man claimed he saw a candle flickering within. Another saw a face, not distant, not fleeting, but near, staring directly at him from the other side of a window that had no wall. He ran. When he returned to town, he was barefoot, his socks soaked with something that shimmered like ink. He never explained what he saw. He only muttered that he would not return, that the face was his own Dot. Another visitor, a woman with dark eyes and a walking stick carved with runes, sat beneath the window for 13 hours. She said she wanted to listen, that the forest had forgotten how to speak and needed a witness. When she left, her hair had turned white from root to end. She never spoke again. The light from the window is not constant. It comes in pulses, as if breathing, as if remembering. Sometimes you can smell smoke in the air, though nothing burns. The scent is strange dry parchment, pine sap, and iron. Some say it's the memory of blood soaked into the floorboards that no longer exist. Others say it's older still. One man returned to the site with a compass. It spun. He took photos. None developed. Where the window should have been, there was only darkness, dense and total, as though the film itself refused to remember. And yet, the forest remembers. Trees near the frame grow away from it. Their trunks bend at odd angles, as if shielding themselves. No animals nest nearby. Birds avoid the canopy overhead. Even the wind falls quiet when it reaches that bend in the trail. Some say the window is a gate, that it peers into a time that never happened, or a version of the town that still breathes somewhere sideways in the folds of the world. Others believe it is an eye watching, not forward, but backward, that it is not us who look into it, but it that looks through us. The ground beneath it never stays dry. Even in drought, the soil is damp, soft, as if waiting to open once. A group of local teenagers dared one another to sleep beneath the window. They brought tents, lanterns, laughter. By midnight, they were silent. By morning, they were gone. Their tents were still there, still zipped, still warm, but the sleeping bags were empty. In the center of the site, someone had drawn a circle in ash. At its center, a handprint, child-sized, pressed deep into the dirt. No one claimed responsibility. The forest does not give back what it takes, and still the window remains, untouched by storm or time, its frame dark with age, its corners splintered but whole. If you look at it during the day, it seems harmless, just old wood wrapped in vines. But when dusk settles, when the sky bleeds violet and the owls forget to call it glows, not with sunlight, not with fire, with memory, it remembers the families who vanished, the hands that built it, the things that watched through it from the inside, the curses spoken aloud and those merely thought. It remembers the flicker of candlelight on trembling faces, the scrape of nails on wood, the final breath before silence, and it waits. If you ever find yourself in the dark entry forest, and you feel the temperature drop too suddenly, and the shadows tilt a little longer than they should, turn back. If you hear your name whispered in a voice that sounds like your own, do not answer. And if you see a light in the trees where no house should be, walk away. Do not look into the window, because something might look back, and if it sees you, it may remember what it used to be, what it lost, what it needs, and names, once spoken in that place, are never forgotten. Only the forest forgets nothing, and the window never closes. The wind does not move like it should in Bodhi. It whispers in strange spirals, curling through hollow door frames and whistling across glassless windows. It carries the scent of rust and pine, of dried blood and scorched wood. It sings to no one. It warns nothing. It simply circles a hush that never stops moving. Bodhi, California, lies in a cradle of bone-dry hills, wrapped in the silver breath of old ghosts and half-buried dreams. It is not a ghost town in name only, is a place, arrested in its final breath. Time here did not fade. It fractured. You walk the dirt streets and the buildings remain just as they were, leaning, creaking, locked in a kind of reverent paralysis. Bottles still sit on saloon shelves. Beds remain made, waiting for sleep that never came. Tools lie where hands dropped them, and yet, above the broken rooftops, the church bell is gone. It once hung from a weathered wooden tower at the town's southern edge, a simple bell, forged in San Francisco, mounted with iron bolts that had long outlasted their makers. Its sound was deep and slow, a low bronze murmur that called miners to prayer and warned of avalanche and fire. It was never meant to be sacred, but something changed. The stories begin with a boy. No one recalls his name. He was 9. Some say he was the pastor's son, others a drifter's orphan, but all agree he stood beneath the bell on the day the wind rose. It was a clear morning in early spring. Cold sunlight spilled across the church steps. The bell had not tolled in weeks. It hung silent in the sun, still as bone. And then, without warning, it rang, a single chime. Long, low, shivering. Witnesses swore there was no hand on the rope. No birds nearby, no movement on the tower. And then the wind came. It rose sudden and furious, like a breath caught in God's throat. It tore through the chapel doors, scattering hymnals, snapping shutters. The bell trembled once more, then fell. They say the child never even looked up. The weight crushed him instantly. His mother arrived moments later, barefoot in the dust. She fell to her knees and held what remained. And in the silence after, with the wind already dying, she whispered that she had heard the bell in her sleep, that it had woken her moments before, that she knew it had rung not for worship but for warning. The townsfolk removed the bell the next morning. Some claimed it was out of grief, others fear. They took it down with ropes and guilt and buried it far beyond the hills. Or so they said. No one knows where. No records remain. The church tower stands empty, now just a square of shadow against the sky, and then the curse began. It started with the bottles. Visitors would slip glass relics into their coat amber vials. Cobalt, jars, just souvenirs. But accidents followed. A man who stole a tin plate burned his home to the ground weeks later. A woman who pocketed a child's boot broke both legs in a fall, though she swore she never tripped. Another took a wooden beam fragment and woke 3 nights running with blood at the corners of his eyes. The rangers say letters arrive each month, sometimes whole packages, people begging to return what they took. The letters speak of sickness, of fire, of voices. One man included a nail and a note. She won't stop crying. Please, take it back. They take nothing from Bodhi now, except for the bell. That was never returned, and yet the town remembers on winter nights. When the snow falls slowly and the wind forgets how to howl, there comes a sound. It is not loud, it does not echo, but it travels through bone, through boards, through the floor of your boots. A single note, long, hollow, trembling, the sound of rusted bronze. Some say it tolls only for the guilty, that if you hear it, you have taken something that does not belong. Others say it tolls for the dead not, the ones buried in marked graves, but those lost to greed, to frost, to silence. Some believe the bell was never buried at all, that it was taken deep into the earth by something older than time, and that it rings still below the surface, whenever the weight of what was lost becomes too great. The miners called it the debt, not gold, not silver, but something else. The cost of digging where the earth had asked to be left alone. The price of reaching too deep, too fast, with no prayers on their lips. They knew that every strike of pickaxe, every broken vein of quartz, fed something with no name. And when that something woke, it rang the bell. The boy was only the first to hear it. Now Bodhi waits. It does not decay, it does not crumble. It simply waits preserved, not by time, but by memory, by reverence. The houses lean, but do not fall. The steps creak, but do not break, because the town holds its breath. Every building, every door, frozen in that moment after the chime and before the wind. Visitors still come. They take photographs. They whisper. They tiptoe past the church. And sometimes only, sometimes one, will pause beneath the empty tower and hear it. That one long toll, not with ears, but with marrow, with the part of the soul that remembers being warned. And if they stay too long, they remember what they cannot return. So Bodhi remains, the town stitched in stillness, hemmed by hills and shadow, its bell gone, its grief buried, its silence sacred. But when the snow falls gently enough, when the night is thick with breath and no one dares speak, the air begins to hum, soft, metallic, patient, as though somewhere the bell turns once more. Not for worship, not for time, but for remembrance. It began with a light that should not have burned. At dawn, the sky over Aurora, Texas, opened like a wound. Witnesses spoke of a flame that moved without sound, a silver fire that shimmered like metal catching its breath. It did not fall so much as choose. It curved, tilted, circled once as if looking, and then descended, slow and solemn, into the brittle spring soil of Judge Proctor's field. The year was 1897, that morning. The wind carried the scent of scorched iron and the hush that follows something older than understanding. The townspeople gathered with eyes half blinded by dawn. They saw the crater, the smoke, the splinters of something that had not been built by any hand they knew. Pieces curved like bones, too large for man, forged of a metal no blacksmith could name. And near the center of the wreckage, half buried in ash and silence, they found a figure. Not a man, not quite. He was small, they said, too slender for his limbs. His skin held the dull sheen of tarnished silver, but not like paint, like it had grown that way. One witness claimed his joints looked like hinges, and his eyes, though closed, bore the impression of being shaped, wrong-angled, elongated, reflecting no color at all. His clothing was tight, seamless, more like a shell than a suit, torn in places, singed at the edges, but intact. And he was dead. Or so they thought. They brought him gently to the churchyard. There was no doctor brave enough to name his cause, no scripture wide enough to house him. So the pastor read the Psalms anyway, voice trembling as the words fell into the ash-covered grass. They wrapped him in linen, not for custom, not for faith, But because the sight of him unsettled something in the breath, the grave was shallow, as all graves were then. The headstone bore no name, only a carving. Some remember a flame, others a six-pointed star. One child later said it looked like a compass turned sideways. No record survives of who first whispered the word visitor. They called it a meteor. The official line, a tale to chase the unease back into the shadows. But the field never grew right after that. The ground turned stiff and grey. Crops failed in crooked rows around the scar. Birds avoided the tree line. And sometimes, in the heat of summer, the breeze carried something else. A scent like old coins and machine oil. A hum just at the edge of hearing, like breath inside. A bell jar. Years passed. People forgot, or tried. The headstone remained, but it watched. Children dared each other to touch it. Dogs refused to sit near it. And one night decades later, young man with oil on his fingers and whiskey in his mouth came to take a rubbing of the engraving. He never finished. He ran from the graveyard barefoot and screaming. Said the stone had been warm. Said he heard something from the earth below like ticking by morning. The marker was gone. No one had removed it. No one saw it taken. Where it once stood, there was only a patch of dry soil. No roots, no ants, no grass. Even the dew refused to rest there. They searched, dug, replanted, but nothing grew. And when they exhumed the spot years later, there was no coffin, no bones, no cloth, only dust. Some said the wind had claimed it. Others believed the earth had swallowed what it could not explain. But those who stood there longest, those who knelt and placed their palms on the cool dirt, said something else entirely. It had been reclaimed. They don't say by what, but the night the grave vanished. Lights were seen in the hills, pale, silent, circling like wolves. One blinked in and out like a dying star. Another hovered over the old orchard for 17 minutes before disappearing without a sound. No one took photographs. No one spoke loudly. In Aurora, reverence clings tighter than fear. A decade later, a traveler came to town. He walked the cemetery twice. No camera, no map. Just quiet footsteps and a cane carved with symbols no one could read. When asked what he was looking for, he only smiled and said, "The borrowed." He stayed one night, then left. And the next morning, the patch where the grave had been was soft, not sunken, not disturbed, but softened, as if something had risen through it, not dug, not broken but passed, and left behind the scent of warm copper. Today, the cemetery is still there, quiet, kept. The grass curls evenly except in that one spot, which remains dry no matter how long the rain lingers. School children learn nothing of the story. The historical plaques make no mention of silver men or fallen lights. Only the elders remember. Only the wind still carries it. Some nights, if the breeze is slow enough, and you walk past the field where the fire fell, you may hear something. Small and strange, a low hum, a mechanical sigh. A sound like breath drawn through wire dot, and if you press your hand to the ground, you may feel warmth, not heat, not sun but warmth, as though something still rests beneath the soil, dreaming of skies it once knew, or of places it has yet to find. They buried it, yes, but some things are not meant to remain buried. Some things wait, some return, and some were never ours to keep. They sang louder than usual that morning, louder, and with a kind of tremble beneath it. Not fear, not joy, something older, something like knowing. It was a Thursday in Aberfan, the 21st of October. 1966. The sky was the color of slate and milk. The mountains above the valley had worn that same color for decades. Gray upon gray, rain upon ruin. But the children at Pantglas Junior School wore bright scarves and clutched wet satchels, humming with the breathless rhythm of another damp morning in Wales. Their hymn, as they gathered in assembly, echoed faintly against the windows. The kind of song that settles into stone and waits there at 9:13 a.m. The earth groaned. It was not the sound of collapse, not yet, just a shift. A whisper from the mountain above, as if something vast had drawn a slow breath behind its broken teeth. The tip the mountain's waste heap had grown monstrous in recent years. The black spoil of coal mining, piled recklessly above the town, had absorbed too much rain. Beneath the surface, water threaded its way through the muck-like veins of sleep, silent, invisible, waiting dot. And then it gave way. A black wave rose. From the hillside, not fire, not water, but slurry, thick, cold dark, and swift as wind. It moved with purpose, bending trees and swallowing walls. There was no time to run. No alarm, just the roar of buried years, liquefied by rain and gravity. It struck the school without hesitation. The windows shattered inward, bricks cracked, beams splintered, and then silence, as if the mountain had been waiting not just to fall, but to hush. 144 souls were lost that day. 116 of them were children. Most had not yet reached the hour of their first lesson. But the story does not end with numbers. A rescue worker named in the records, faceless in memory, claimed he heard something as he clawed through the muck. Not a cry, not a scream, a hymn, faint and slow, like breath through a cracked door. He said it came from beneath the rubble, deep beneath, where the light no longer reached. A melody half familiar, soft as thread and aching with sweetness. He dug faster, but when they reached the place, there was only silence. No child, no song, just the soft drip of cold water down the broken plaster, and the scent of wet stone. No one else heard it, or if they did not speak of it. The days that followed were filled with digging, naming, mourning. Tiny coffins, fathers who could not stand, mothers who whispered lullabies to the air because there was nothing else left to hold. The town of Aberfan collapsed inward, not from stone, but from absence. And yet, something remained. The church. Bells did not ring for the lost, not at first. There were no words, no right tones. And so the valley fell into its own hush, as though time itself had paused to remember how to grieve. But the rain fell differently. It landed softer near the memorial. Flowers left by trembling hands seemed to last longer. Wind passed through Aberfan with a hush in its step, as though careful not to wake anyone, and people began to speak, not loudly, but enough. Some said they still heard singing, especially just before storms, or when fog hung low across the fields. Not from speakers or radios, not from memory, but from the earth itself. A hymn with no words. A tune no one alive remembers teaching. A cleaner at the schoolhouse, long rebuilt, long blessed once, left her mop to follow the sound. She said it led her to the cloakroom wall. Behind it, nothing. But her hands were wet with soot when she turned the key in the light switch. Others say the song is not in the wind, but in the water. That the stream which cuts through the village holds notes between its ripples. That when the moon is thin and the valley quiet, the sound curls up from the drains like incense. One widow kept a stone from the mountain, A small one, flat, black as ash. She kept it on her mantle in a lace handkerchief. She said it warmed itself sometimes, said she could smell coal smoke when it did. And always, always, the smell was followed by the sound. They called them the choir that died in their sleep. Not because they were asleep when it came us were not, but because something deeper than sleep seemed to claim them. A rest without panic, a hush not of surrender, but of acceptance. Their hymn had not been frightened. It had been full, whole, the way voices sound when they know something is ending and sing anyway. To this day, the grass above the memorial remains a deeper green than anywhere else. The marble does not chip as quickly. Birds perch on the railings, but never on the stones. Tourists arrive and grow quiet without being asked. Even children, wild and laughing, lower their voices when they pass by, not because of what happened, but because of what still lingers. The song has no name. No one has written it down. No notes, no bars. Just the memory of a melody that once filled a school assembly with something larger than hope, deeper than grief. A final hymn. Some say the children never truly left, that their voices were gathered, not lost, that they became part of the mountain, not buried by it, that the rain that once betrayed them now carries them gently across the valley. Others simply listen on still nights, when the air is heavy and the sky folds into itself like wool. The sound may return, faint, threadbare, but there, and if you hear it, do not speak, just listen, because some songs are not meant to be answered, only remembered. Some say memory has a weight. Others say it has a voice, one that does not always belong to the living dot in the quiet folds of Northumberland. Near the rain-polished stones of Hexham, there once lived two girls who knew things they should not have known, not by hearsay, not by dreams, but as if they'd lived those moments before, stitched into another skin, buried beneath time but not quite silence. They were born in 1958, a year wrapped in grey fog and still morning. Their parents, John and Florence, were not new to parenthood, but they were raw with the ache of absence. Only 10 months earlier, their daughters, Joanna, age 11, and Jacqueline, age 6, had been killed by a speeding driver as they crossed the road to church. A Sunday morning, a patch of sun, then gone. The man who struck them was said to have been drunk, or perhaps just mad. He never apologized. He never looked back. Florence grieved in quiet ways, folding dresses never to be worn again, placing hairbrushes in drawers with soft cloth. John, on the other hand, searched for meaning, and when the doctor said twins, he wept, not from joy, not from fear, but from something he would later call recognition. The girls, Jennifer and Gilliana, arrived healthy, pink-fisted, quiet, identical in almost every way, save for a strange pair of marks. A small, crescent birthmark behind Jennifer's right ear, and a scar-like impression across her forehead, low and pale. Just above her left eye, Jacqueline had fallen on that eye once, years ago, split it open. They had to carry her, blood in her lashes, to the clinic on the hill. The new baby bore the same mark. As the twins grew, the household grew quieter, not from neglect, but from an unspoken tension, a wondering. The girls played together endlessly, apart, never out of sight. They never spoke of the dead. No one told them the names. Joanna and Jacqueline had vanished before the twins were born. There were no photos in the house, no toys left behind, and yet Jennifer would reach for a doll she could not name and say, "This was my favorite." Gillian, passing a hedge, would murmur, "This is where the car came from." At first, John and Florence dismissed it as coincidence, a child's mimicry, but the knowing grew sharper. They asked for toys that no longer existed, described the old swing set that had been dismantled and burned after the accident, even mentioned friends the previous girls had known but whose names were never spoken aloud after the loss. One morning, Jennifer woke screaming. She said she'd dreamed of pain, of wheels, of glass, of a figure with no face. "The man in the black car," she whispered, clutching her chest. Florence grew pale. That was what Jacqueline had called him too. The man with the black car. Still, they told no one. But in the village, rumors began to murmur. Shopkeepers noticed the way the twins would reach for things in perfect synchronicity. Teachers heard them finish each other's thoughts with no signal. One child swore she saw the girls change places in class, without ever moving. At the age of 5, it stopped. The girls seemed to forget. Their speech, once strange and old for their years, softened into typical chatter. They played with new toys, never asked for the swing set again. Their drawings shifted from fields and familiar roads to castles and dragons and birthday cakes. But Florence kept the old drawings. One showed the exact curve of the street where the crash had occurred, drawn in perfect perspective. Another showed 2 girls holding hands, one slightly smaller, standing before a church door. The older girl had a ribbon in her hair. Joanna always wore ribbons. And then there was the swing set. Gillian, though older now, still sketches it. In margins, on envelopes, on napkins in cafes. A wooden frame, hand-built. A rope swing, rust on the chain. "I don't know why I draw it," she once said, half laughing. "I've never seen one like it." No one dares correct her as adults. The twins live quietly. Nothing strange ever happened again. No more dreams. No more voices. Just a childhood thick with mystery and the slow fading of something the world did not know how to hold. But some things linger. One neighbor recalled a moment just after the burial of the first 2 sisters. A wind had risen through the churchyard, curling the grass like fingers. He looked up to find 2 butterflies bright, impossible in that season, circling the stone cross at the foot of the children's grave. He told no one, not until years later, when the twins passed his window and one turned just for a moment and stared directly at him, her expression unreadable, and he felt that wind again. Sometimes he still dreams of that look. A priest once said souls move in tides, that the sea forgets no name, only learns to carry it differently. Perhaps that is all it was, a wave folding over itself, a memory echoing louder than most, or perhaps something deeper, a lesson carved into flesh and given breath. In Hexham, the wind passes gently over the gravestones. The trees creak without menace, and on rare days, when the fog rolls low and the sky turns the color of old wool, 2 women walk the edge of the village, neither speaking, both drawing the same swing set on the same page. They do not know why, and they do not ask. Some questions are not meant to be answered, only remembered. There are roads that forget where they begin, and there is one just outside Elkhorn, Wisconsin, that refuses to be found. It doesn't appear on any map. No road sign bears its name. But the locals call it Lantern Lane, and they say that if you turn too sharply off the county highway just after the frost sets in, you'll find it. A narrow dirt track, swallowed by cornfields, stitched with fog and lined with fence posts that rot without falling. It is quiet there, not the hush of peace, but the silence of breath held too long. And if you come past midnight, when the wind has begun to lift the last husks from the stalks, you may see the light. It is not bright, not brave. It glows the way, an old candle, dust-tired at the edges, faint yellow, with a center that wavers. It does not swing, it does not blink. It floats just above the ground, drifting slowly between the rows of corn like a thought someone forgot to finish. No one knows where it came from. Some say it is the ghost of a railroad man who once lived near the fields. A father who walked the tracks each night calling for the daughter who vanished one harvest moon and was never seen again. He died with her name on his lips and the lantern still burning in his hand. Others say it isn't a man at all, but something older, something that never wore a face, only borrowed one. But this much is known: the light appears every fall, always just after the first hard frost, always when the air turns metallic and the leaves rot sweet in the dark, and always alone. Children whisper about it in schoolyards. Teenagers dare each other to find it. Some have tried. Most return, but not all return the same. One girl, barefoot, mud-streaked eyes like cracked porcelain, was found just after sunrise, standing still at the edge of the field. Her clothes were soaked, though the sky had stayed clear all night. Her hair clung to her face in wet ropes. She wouldn't speak, not until they gave her warm milk and an old quilt. And even then, all she said was, "He asked me not to tell you." She never said who or what. After that, the townsfolk grew quieter. No one blocked the road. No one marked it off. But people stopped looking. The crops grew around it, shoulders hunched, stalks bent inward, and still the lantern came. There are stories. A farmer who followed the light, only to be found 3 days later asleep beneath the trestle bridge with soil under his nails and blood behind his ears. A pair of lovers who chased it laughing, only to return with eyes too wide and a silence that stretched between them for the rest of their lives. A hunter who claimed he touched it, that the flame turned blue, and for a moment the field was filled with voices, not shouting, not speaking, just breathing. But when asked to describe what he heard, he wept. The old men at the feed store say the lantern moves faster now, that it once hovered slow and lazy, but now it darts like it's searching. They say it hesitates, pauses, waits, as if it recognizes some people and turns away, as if it's disappointed. One woman, in her final days, confessed to following it once, said she'd seen it 3 times, but only followed once, the night her brother died in a river he'd never learned to swim. She said the lantern led her to a clearing that shouldn't exist. In the clearing stood a man with no shoes and a coat full of rain. He did not speak, but he looked at her with such sorrow she nearly knelt. "I didn't recognize him," she whispered, "but he knew me." She asked what the lantern was waiting for. The man simply lifted the light toward her face, as if to memorize it, then turned and walked into the corn, the light following behind like a shadow with no owner. She never returned to Lantern Lane, but every year she left a candle at the end of her driveway on the night of the first frost. Just in case, no one knows who built the road. Old survey records show no route in that direction. Aerial photographs blur at the edges. GPS freezes when you get too close, and compasses anyone still bothers to bring one spin softly in place. Some believe it's a rift, not a haunting, but a hunger, a memory that grew tired of being forgotten and learned how to flicker. Some believe it's not looking for anyone, at all but simply remembering someone it lost. Again and again. But those who've stood at the edge of the field, watching the faint yellow glow drift like a prayer through the corn, say something else. They say it feels familiar, not in fear, not in danger, but in longing, like a name you almost remember, a place you've dreamed of but never seen, a feeling you carried as a child and buried in the folds of growing up. The lantern never comes to the same place twice. It moves, it waits, it listens, and when it vanishes, it does so without sound. One blink, gone. The girl who said he asked me not to tell you moved away. Years later, she was found asleep in her apartment with a sheet of paper clutched in one hand, a child's drawing, a field, a road, and a tiny yellow flame drawn in the margin. Her husband said she'd been sleepwalking again, and that she had started humming something, a tune he'd never heard, low and sad, like a lullaby from a place where the stars never rise. Lantern Lane is still there, not on maps, not on records, but the corn knows where it is. So does the wind, and every fall, just past midnight, the light returns patient, flickering, faithful, as if waiting for someone it once knew, or someone who forgot to say goodbye.